And almost half of all electric line that exists in the United States is run by electric co-ops. So we are an organization that began as a grassroots organization, just like many of yours. We began in the late 1930s and early 1940s when urban utilities did not want to supply power to America's farms. It was an expensive proposition to run line for miles and miles and miles just to connect one or two families. Their business model was based on density, which rural America did not have. And part of the government response to the Great Depression, when the Tennessee Valley Authority was created, which in itself generated millions and millions of watts of power, America's farmers banded together, formed cooperatives, and brought electricity to rural America, which is a process that only ended in the mid-1950s. And in 1962, when the U.S. Department of State created the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, they turned to NRECA as the go-to people to bring electrification to rural communities throughout the world. And this organization has now been responsible for bringing power to 110 million people around the globe in nearly 50 countries. So we have worked in Latin America, we've worked in the Caribbean, we've worked extensively in Africa and Asia as well. And before I joined NRECA, I worked for a number of human rights-based organizations that did work in Afghanistan and Africa and Latin America. I have also been involved in other organizations that work in the Middle East, particularly addressing minority rights for groups in Israel. And I have also been an executive at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts here in Washington. So I have approached fundraising through many, many different channels. And I'm very happy to be with you here today to share a number of perspectives, both those of large institutional fundraising as well as grassroots organizing, which I've been doing for the last 12 or 15 years. So we're going to work off of a PowerPoint presentation, and I encourage you at any point to raise your hand with a comment or a question. I think that we can have a much more interesting and productive conversation that way. And I was a little bit perplexed by the title of this presentation, because I think that if one is looking at fundraising, it is not separate and apart from proposal writing. Fundraising is a series of linear steps that equip both you and your organization to be effective communicators of your need and of your cause to new publics, and to engage them in a very meaningful way. So here, if you are doing your job both as an external representative of your organization and as an internal organizer, by the time you get to writing a proposal, much of your homework will have been completed. So these are the steps that we are going to address today. We're going to talk about the mission of your organization, its vision, which means where you want it to be. We're going to talk about its needs, how to prepare a case statement, how you organize your business plan to raise money, and how that has to be accompanied by a marketing and communications plan. Then you're going to implement your plan, and you're going to acknowledge and recognize those who made your success possible. So, how many of you think if you were in an elevator and had about 3 minutes to explain your organization, that you could give a succinct, what we call the elevator speech, about what you do and what difference you make? Show of hands. So we have a distinct minority here who are positioned to do that. And one of the first things that you need to do when you go back home, or even in advance of that, is to figure out how you can describe your organization in about 30 words and tell an individual what you stand for, what you do, and what difference you make. Boils down to those three simple points. What do you stand for? What are you doing? And what difference do you make? Because if you look static and you don't look dynamic, and if you don't show that you're thinking, not about where you are, but about where you want to be, you're going to lose your prospect. So let's keep that in mind. I would say if there is any takeaway, homework assignment number 1 for today, it's think about your mission. Think about your statement of 30 words or so that can wrap up succinctly those 3 points. Once you know your mission, you're in a much better place to figure out your vision. Why would you be going to a donor, either an individual, a foundation, or a corporation, to say, I need your help, I need your advice, I want to build a relationship with you, I want you to be part of my future, I want you to be part of making a positive change for all of us. That's your vision. You have to, not you individually, but you as a leader in your organization, you have to be part of, you have to be the force that drives that conversation. You have to manage that conversation at the executive level, at the board level, at the staff level. You've got to bring in your key donors if you have them. You've got to make them feel that they are part of the process and that they are valued for more than their financial involvement with you. So that's a conversation that isn't yours to have with yourself, but it's yours to have with others. Who are the most important people? Who are the stakeholders in your organization? Okay? And that's going to say, here's my mission, but this is what we really want to be doing. If, you know, this is my blue skies vision of where we want to be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And that's going to put you on a trajectory for growth, and your fundraising is going to accompany that vision. Okay? Any comments or questions so far? You know, when I joined NRECA a year ago, well, it's now a year and a half, I said to the existing staff, what's your case statement? Why would you go to somebody and ask for money? And they said to me, what's a case statement? Well, a case statement is pretty much your catechism. It's what is going to drive everything that you say about your organization. It should be a source document that tells people, tells you, tells your staff, tells your board, tells anybody who's interested in knowing more about you, exactly what your mission is, what your vision is, along with every other detail that's going to make your organization tick. When you do go to write your proposals, when you go to speak to the press, when you go to speak to anybody, any external audience, your case statement should be the governing document that drives what you are saying about your organization. Because it has not only fact, but it has to have passion. It has to be written with a certain lofty language that reflects that there is a higher meaning to what you are doing, and that there is a vision to improve society for the future through the work of your organization. And that's a rare combination that you can't always expect somebody who's a program officer to have. You've got to drive that. You've got to inspire people. You want to drive that passion. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I just want to check, is this like a succinct kind of thing that you want someone to pick up and get engaged? Is this a succinct kind of statement, or do you want to go into great detail? So is the person going to just pick it up and have a look, or
are you expecting them to read it in great detail?
Well, this man, Michael Seltzer, who wrote this book, Securing Your Organization's Future, says in his book that it can be as short as an index card. I happen to disagree with him, and actually, I wish I'd gotten to the title first and written the book, because I would have disputed that format. A case statement should be as long as it needs to be. It's largely an internal document that anybody can resource, so it should be as complete as possible. It should address all of these steps that were in what we are going to cover today. So you want that to be as complete and comprehensive a statement as you can make it. It doesn't have to be 45 pages, but I've seen case statements that run 15 and 20, because different people will access different parts of it for different purposes. And you wanted to talk about your mission and your vision, your program, your aspirations, how you operate, who has funded you, what your needs are. And that's your most dynamic exposition that you're going to use of, why do I need money? So this is the dynamic document that you are always updating, and it's largely your jobs to make sure that the document remains current. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Just two quick questions. When you're saying case statement, are you thinking like a capacity and capability statement? Does that come out of it, or are they one and the same?
I think they're one and the same.
And secondly, could you give us your 30-word pitch for your organization?
Yes.
Okay.
NRECA International Foundation exists to provide electricity to rural populations in developing countries around the world. Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay. So I don't want to rush through this discussion on case statement, because it really is a very critical part of preparing you to do your work. A good case statement will allow you, should opportunity present itself and you need to turn around a proposal in 24 hours or less, your case statement should actually provide you with most of the narrative and language that you need to plug in. Your proposal should then only require an identification of the immediate needs to which you're asking the donor to respond. It should personalize the document so that it's addressed to his or her or its particular interests. And it should make your work significantly easier than it would be if you were starting from scratch. If a board member comes to you and says that X, Y, and Z corporation or Mr. or Ms. individual is interested in making a grant but is leaving the country on Thursday, can you get a proposal in his hands immediately? You shouldn't have to start from scratch. Your case statement should give you the basis of what you need to get that good proposal. It should be you should be able to draw from it and not include the whole thing. Okay, so I can't underscore enough how important that document is. You also, if you're developing an active board of directors for your organization, the board of directors of an NGO or a not-for-profit, contrary to what many of them may think, their primary responsibility is to help you raise money. And it's easy, I'm told, for an American to make that statement because it's part of the water supply in this country. It's what people know coming onto not-for-profit boards. But I do think it's one excellent lesson that all of you can take home to help educate your boards, because you don't do this by yourself. Fundraising is part art, it's part science, but none of it is magic. And that's an important thing for you to get your boards to understand as well. We're going to talk later about how organizations silo themselves. It's very usual and customary for organizations to hire somebody who has a good reputation as a fundraiser, and then to sit back and say, okay, we hear you're a good fundraiser, make it happen. And nothing else has to change in the organization. Well, that's not true. Everything has to change in the organization, usually, particularly if you're inheriting a stagnant environment. So we will get to that later on in the discussion.
I want to ask about that.
Go ahead. Talk.
Thank you. So what do you mean? What are things that needs to be changed? So you hire someone to do fundraising for the organization as it is. You aren't creating a new organization or changing the structure of it to do the fundraising, right?
Okay. So my organization has been in existence since 1943. Okay, as a trade association. It's board of 47 representatives. We have one board member from every state in America that has electric cooperatives. And this population is largely a reflection of those we serve. They're rural. They are not particularly well connected. Some of them have money, most of them do not. It took a lot of work on my part to make a case to them to commit to a $1,000 annual contribution from each of them. Most of them have complied. In other organizations where I have worked, $1,000 is an entry-level gift. For them, it's a major gift. So first axiom that you have to remember, you start where your client is and not where you want him to be. So for them, this was a big step. This was a major step. But I said to them, if you want me to credential this organization before the major foundations of America, before major corporate supporters, before individuals who have an interest in the developing world, the first question is going to be, what does your board do? Well, if my board continued to do what it had been doing, which was nearly nothing, I wouldn't have been well positioned to present this case. Similarly, most of our key donors, and there weren't too many of them, were underperforming given their capacity. So I had to go to them and raise the stakes a little bit, which I did. So although this foundation is not raising megabucks right now, in 15 months we've doubled our annual income. And it's largely been through getting the board on board, getting key individuals in the cooperative community to commit to that $1,000 level. When I came in the door, we had 5 donors of $1,000 plus. We now have 128. We created a donor club, a committee of 100, and that gave a little cachet and exclusivity to the process. Board members felt that if they weren't participating, they were left out. So there was an incentive for them to come on to join this. And I had to be able to show that I had a critical mass of the industry behind me before I was positioned to go beyond and ask others for support as well. So that requires cultural change. It requires people to understand that being a leader means that you've got to demonstrate your leadership through giving. It meant that I had to provide some sex appeal to what this work was about. People were really quite unaware of it. Leadership out in the field, the head of cooperative, there were 900 co-ops in the United States. Very few understood what the foundation was doing. And so we had to start sending them stories and communicating with them. We had to build a marketing plan and a communications vehicle to get them to see what was going on. We had to use social media. We had to use print media. We had to do all kinds of, we had to have spokespeople come in to talk. Commercial attaches from various embassies in the Washington area come and talk about the difference electrification has made. So you've got to build a movement, and it cannot be a stagnant process. And probably the hardest first step is getting your leadership to understand that they have to have a stake in this as well. They can't sit on the sidelines and say, okay, make it happen. Okay, so I think we've pretty much taken care of the case statement for the moment. We can always come back to it if need be. But is everybody clear on the scope of what this document has to be and the need to keep it current? Okay, so mission, vision, values, and the who, what, and why of your organization. Okay, key questions that you need to address and be prepared to discuss. How does this organization help people? Whom are you helping? Your vital services, your track record. So it's very common today in the foundation world for people to use the term metrics, that people want to see, can you quantify your results? What difference have you made in a year? Sometimes you have to have the courage to respond to a funder. We're not going to have metrics within a year. We're not going to affect change within a year. This is a situation that's existed for centuries. We have a 3-5 year plan that's going to really begin to facilitate change. So we need you to have the faith and the confidence that over a 5-year period, we can do and achieve what we say we're going to do. So don't give the impression that your fundraising is going to be a magic bullet. You want to talk about your plans for the future. We go back to the vision and your dreams. You want to demonstrate that you are an efficient, effective organization that uses its funds well and that can demonstrate accountability for how your money is spent. Your name and the name of your organization and your reputation are the most important assets that you have the first time you go into a meeting with a funder. If you have the reputation of being transparent, straightforward, results-driven, and that you have the expertise to do what you say you're going to do, then you've crossed the most important first threshold that you have, okay? So that goes to the question of why do you, more than any other organization, deserve support for this initiative? What distinguishes you over any other organization to complete the task at hand? So, questions so far, or comments?
Regarding the previous slide, when you were saying how you present yourself the moment you enter a room, I feel it might be different culturally from one place to another. Like I'm from Egypt, for example. If I go to a room and speak bluntly and courageously and all these things, people would be intimidated or just feel like I'm rude. So like I feel like, do you think like that differs from a culture to another, or like in the fundraising world, it doesn't matter?
I think it very definitely matters. And, my approach is not uniform with everybody with whom I speak. If I'm in a corporate environment, people are looking for different things than they are when you're trying to engage them as an individual. I have been in Bedouin tents in the desert where we have had to convince the leaders of a clan to allow their daughters to attend social work courses at the local university. That's a very different approach, and different cultures have different ways of making points. In the Bedouin culture where I was working for a couple of years, you could not be direct. It's a very circular conversation so that until you make your point. But you've got to approach it from different angles. You've got to imply, as it's a very opposite to what one would do in the United States. So cultural sensitivity is extremely important. It's a very good reason why when you're making the match about who's going to present and who's going to make the pitch, that often in this country, I will take a board member with me where I feel that there is a stronger compatibility, okay? So, when I first started with NRECA, here I was, the East Coaster, the New Yorker. I didn't have a whole lot in common with some of the farmers and ranchers with whom I was dealing out west. And it took a while for me to figure out where's the common ground between me and them, so that I had compatibility with them, okay? And that applies in any dynamic, in any situation. Okay? Yes?
By the way, I just wanted to let you know that we will have access to the PowerPoint, I believe. So so just to reassure you, please go ahead.
Yeah, apologies for taking you back. My just question is, can the case statement be submitted as a separate statement or as a separate document, or it has to be part of the proposal?
You're talking about the case?
Yes.
The case is really, for the most part, an internal document that you and your colleagues have. It's part of board training too. You know, I've observed, particularly with boards that do not have a rigorous training, that you bring somebody who's either, say, an alum of your college, or somebody who's expressed interest in the mission of your organization. He or she makes a substantial gift and is provided absolutely no training about the needs of the organization. So he or she goes off to talk with his friends at the country club or you know, in the corporate boardroom, and pretty much is making up the case as he goes along. And it may not be relevant to what you as the institution actually needs. It's very incumbent upon an organization and the fundraising office in particular to make sure that everybody who is an external spokesman for your organization, and that includes your board, is well-versed and trained not only in the history of your organization, but its mission and its vision, and can recite that elevator speech just as well as you can, and knows that these 10 points or these 5 points reflect the current needs of the organization, and this is why we are raising money for them. You will have a bunch of unguided missiles going out representing your organization if you don't have the discipline to make sure that everybody who is raising money with you, because you're not going to be doing it all by yourselves, everybody has to be speaking from the same song sheet.
Okay, one basic question. How can we differentiate between the organizational profile and the case statement of the organization? Like,
one more time, please.
How we can differentiate between the organizational profile, the profile document of the organization, and the
Yes.
case statement? Can we say that the case statement is the shorter version of the organizational profile with the request for funds? One. The second question is that how appropriate to share the profiles of the team members or the board members of the organization in a case statement?
I don't think it's particularly, let me answer the second question first. I don't think it's particularly necessary for you to go into great detail. Certainly, if you're making a proposal and you have it on corporate letterhead, you're going to have your board members' names listed. I don't think you've got to provide too much bio. If 1/3 of your board members have recognizable names in the community, then, or in your country, then I think that that will speak for itself. As far as your profiles go, your organizational profile, as I understand it, is a pretty flat statement. I mean, it's a static statement. It's what you are and what you do. I spoke before about the difference between the art and science of fundraising. The artful part of what you're doing has to be inspirational. It's got to, and it cannot be overt, but your deeds have to speak to the inspiration that you want your potential donors to pick up. And lots of adjectives will get you nowhere. Just the facts should speak for themselves. The vision should speak for itself. You shouldn't need a lot of adjectives to make that statement sing. But it's a very different kind of statement. It's a very comprehensive statement, more than the organizational profile.
Thank you. I think this question is fine, but if every donor organization, they have goals. So if my works does not contribute in their goals, they will not give us funds.
Correct.
So I think that kind of question also should include here.
So later on in this presentation, we're going to get to the question of the research, because in this country, for example, there are 80,000 funding organizations. There is an institution here called the Foundation Center that maintains a database of American foundations. 80,000, ranging from big entities such as the Rockefeller Foundation or the Ford Foundation, right down to a vehicle, the tax vehicle that was created during the Reagan administration called family foundations. It's a way for people who have significant capital to form a family foundation that is tax protected, so long as they are making distributions for charitable purposes in the course of the year. And those don't necessarily compete with the Rockefellers and the Fords, either in their capital or their sophistication. But if you go into that database and you look up rural electrification, 3 organizations materialize out of 80,000. So I've got to be creative in making a match between those foundations that are interested in women's rights, in entrepreneurial development, in education, in healthcare delivery. All of the things that electricity makes possible are actually what I'm selling, not electrification per se. So your possibilities are, it's a slam dunk. You're going to make that match at first sight. You're going to have to really work a little bit and be creative to figure out where the compatibility is, or you're going to have to conclude that you're barking up the wrong tree and you've got to look elsewhere. So those are the possibilities. So not everyone is going to be an immediate match for you.
Thank you. I have a question for the donors. Look for organizations track record. Many organizations come up and do not have a track record, but are just getting started. How then do we approach the donors and we have a good plan for what we're intending to do, and how do we get them to funding that baby project?
Well, again, you're not going to have 100% success, but you don't need to have 100% success. A lot of this is going to depend on your persistence. You know, I deal with a young staff, and we'll settle on a prospect to develop, and I will say at a weekly meeting, you know, where do we stand with A, B, and C? And they'll say, well, I called and left a message, but they didn't call back. And I'll say, well, so what? Call them again. You know, so persistence will get you somewhere sometimes, and sometimes you have to think creatively. Perhaps you have a board member of some significance, if you're fortunate, who can pick up the phone and invite that prospect to a lunch meeting or to coffee or tea. You've got to find some reason for that individual to be enticed by the possibility of connecting with you. But certainly perseverance will get you a long way if you're willing to make the investment in time, and if you are strong enough and have the fortitude to develop a callus where your hurt feelings used to be. So you've got to be, this is a tough business, and you've got to be able to have the persistence and the fortitude, if you believe in what you were doing, to keep at it. And you know, politely. And I think that as you're developing that prospect and your calls are not being returned, perhaps you want to send a letter with some interesting updated information about the organization. If you're fortunate enough to have active board members who will work with you, ask one of them to pick up the phone. This has to be a campaign. This is not a, you know, you're not asking somebody out on a first date. Yes, sir.
Just, I want to give example in Sudan. My name is Hashim from Sudan. I'm working with the British Council. Like when we need to approach donor, for example, we're targeting companies, the biggest companies in Sudan. So we go for a meeting and present the projects that we work with, and we see the reaction of the company, in which area they show interest. For example, we work with education, with arts and culture. So we see what project or which area that they're more interested in it.
Okay.
And after that, we develop the proposal in the area that they show interest and send it to them. I think it's also a way of, before just sending
Yes.
the proposal.
And I would say that you're fortunate that the corporate reps are willing to take the meeting with you. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you can get them. Sometimes you can't. And I think again could be a cultural point of difference. I know that here in Washington, major corporations have lobbyists. Most of them have offices here in DC, and we have used that as an entry point to get some endorsement within their organizations as we're trying to work our way through their.
Okay, I'm Ife from Nigeria, and I've lots of fellows from Nigeria. I want to just ask, as a fundraiser, at what point will you have to turn down a funder? For example, an organization in Nigeria said a funder called them to give them money to implement a project, and they refused the money. So at what point will, now you're telling us about fundraising, and then you're working with an organization as a fundraiser, and then this happens. At what point will you say, no, we don't want this kind of money, we do want this kind of money?
It's a good question. It's not as unusual as you think it might be. And look, if you are, number one, if you are being asked to do something that runs contrary to the ethics and guidelines of your organization, something that's going to compromise your credibility, that's the first reason you shouldn't take the money. Secondly, if you are being diverted from your mission to such a degree that it will render you, it will destroy your brand, then it's another reason to say, this is not, we're flattered, but we believe you've chosen the wrong organization for the project. This is not our expertise. And to the extent that any of you are working with governments that are going to question your activities, if you do something that runs contrary or is not parallel with your mission, then you have to have the tactical and strategic foresight to say, we don't think this is the right thing for us to be doing. I have turned down $250,000 gifts. That's the largest gift I've turned down. So fortunately, none were bigger.
Okay, that's perfect, your response. And this organization, the deal on reproductive health for young people, and then this funder wants them to do a campaign around condom usage for their reproductive health interventions, and they said, no, we're not going to preach condom usage for young people, and then they turn down the funder. So is there a wide gap between what they're doing, since they're doing reproductive health for young people, college students, and all that, and the funding for usage of condom, distribution of condom for their reproductive health activities? So I'm just trying to see if are there times where there will be a total disconnect, even though it's somehow in line with what you're doing, because condom usage for prevention of HIV is also one of the key things when it comes to reproductive health for college students.
So I would say that if upon close examination you would determine that implementing that grant, not taking the money is one thing, setting up the internal infrastructure to deliver the promises of the grant are another. And if implementing that grant would divert you too significantly from your other key projects around which your reputation is built, then you have to say that we are not equipped to do this in an appropriate way. Because they are both within the realm of reproductive health, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are the right implementer for that goal. Okay. Yes.
Mike.
let us imagine that we have this meeting with high-level officials or representatives of an organization that is going of our donor. And I am a simple girl working as a fundraiser for XNZ organization, nonprofit. So what kind of hints and what kind of tactics I should use to convince these people to fund my project?
So, I don't think you're that simple, but depending on what you are funding, either you or somebody within, perhaps somebody who's a beneficiary of your work, is in a position to accompany you to a meeting to talk on a very person-to-person basis about the situation that you're facing, be it reproductive health, be it lack of economic opportunity, be it educational problems in the community, but you want to personalize the case that you're presenting. You can talk about numbers and dollars and metrics, and you might bore your prospect very significantly. If you bring somebody who can speak on a very personal level about, you know, the need and what this particular crisis or situation has done to limit possibilities, and what his or her dream is for the future, you as the professional can then take that story and contextualize it within the larger picture of what the needs are within the country or within the province or the county, so that that individual story that goes to the heart can then be translated into a context that goes to the mind. And you're making, you know, you're approaching that donor then on two levels.
Thank you. My name is Rene from Cameroon. I think just to add to what you said, other things you could do to convince maybe a donor is to tell them how different you are from other people who are doing the same thing. Just slight difference makes a difference.
Distinguishing factor.
Distinguishing. And then tell them that you are an expert in that area, that you have achieved, you have accomplished. And then I think the donor's doors are open for you.
Okay. I would suggest, let's go a little deeper into the presentation, and then we'll take a breather, and then we can go back to questions, okay? So if you would hold the thought, I'll be happy to come back to you, yeah? Okay. So, you know, we spoke just a minute ago about speaking to the heart and speaking to the mind. Well, that can be approached on many different levels. And when you create your business plan, you're going to take your case statement and you're going to see which parts of it are most appropriate for different audiences. Because not everybody wants to hear the same things, not everybody is interested in the same things. So the first thing you have to do is to analyze your universe. Who are your possible supporters? Okay, so you have a board. If you're fortunate, you have a few major donors in your stable already. You also have small donors. And then you have within your country, you have foundations and you have corporations. So you've got to look at your message and figure out what's the best way to present it to each of those audiences. Certainly your board has to hear the big picture. They need to know how to translate this as well. But in appealing to a board, to a nominee for a board, you want to make sure that he or she understands very explicitly what you're doing and what the needs are and what his or her responsibilities are. Very important. You don't bring on a board member and then after the fact say, this is what we expect of you. Put your expectations out right up front, okay? So you also have to create a timeline. I mentioned to you earlier, not all proposals can be delivered in a year. Sometimes you're talking about parts 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes you're talking about a 5-year plan. It can vary. So make sure that when you're delivering your message, that your people are understanding what the time frame is in which your proposal is going to, in which the end results are going to be seen. And then you've got to create a plan. You've got to say, if I have a $5 million budget for this project, and I've asked each board member to contribute $10,000 and I have 15 board members, well, there's a big chunk of it. Where's the rest of it coming from? What are the reasonable expectations based on what my current inventory of donors is? And what can I expect of each board member about taking that message and going out and bringing in new donors as well? So in an ideal situation, you might say, okay, I have 15 board members. Each one has made a $10,000 commitment. I'm up to $150,000. I'm going to ask each one to bring in 5 new donors at $7,500. Not everybody can do that. Some can do more, some can do less. The problem with all of these models that we face is one. These on paper, all of these organizational structures look great until you remember that they're populated by humans. And then you've got to factor in human frailty, and willingness, and ability, and sometimes you've made an inappropriate choice when you bring on a board member. There are all kinds of possibilities and nuances that can get in the way of success. So you want to be careful in choosing your board. If financial capacity is what is the primary driver, make sure that these people are willing and able to make those contributions. And if you're asking each of them to bring on 5 new donors, then make sure they understand that from the beginning and that you are training them appropriately about what they need to know to make that ask. Okay? And so again, look at your case statement, see which parts are appropriate for any of those segments, and that equips you to go farther. So I mentioned to you that your leadership, you're not going to do this all by yourself. Your leadership is there to be used, and they should be used. And you all know what a silo is. And one of the operative models in corporate and organizational management is that every function within an organization falls into a silo, and none of those silos have any communication with the other. We, meaning organizational America, corporate America, we have worked for decades now to break down the silo system of management. But fundraising isn't often a silo by itself. Fundraising interacts with leadership, it interacts with program, it interfaces with marketing, with communications. It is part of every single facet of organizational life. And you want to make sure that you are not placed in the silo, because you will not succeed or fail all by yourself. You will succeed or fail because all of these other aspects of your organization are working in sync with you, that they have all adopted your case statement, that they have been part of that process of creating it, that they understand it, and that you're all working for the same things. And that everybody in your organization, from the receptionist who answers the phone, to the individual who may be parking a donor's car, the way you communicate at every level to your donors and your prospects is a reflection of the hospitality and the good feeling that you want your organization to engender as you're cultivating that prospect. Everybody in your organization has a role to play in that. It's not just a question of being nice. You want to treat these people as if they are guests in your own home. And everybody in your organization has to understand that when a donor or a prospect walks in the door. So we get to the question of the big mystery. Who are your donors? And particularly, who are your new donors? You start with your board, their friends and contacts, and then you have a major donor pool, people who used to be on the board with whom you have sustained great relationship once they rotate off. Many of you may be in situations where your boards stay static and people remain involved for years and years and years. One of the challenges you're going to face is that you want to either expand the board or build a rotation policy so that without hurting feelings, people understand that after 7 years or 6 years or 5 years, they're going to rotate off for at least a year before they can come back. And you're going to allow new energy and new blood and new ideas to come on into your organization. But while these people have rotated off, you want to make sure that they feel like they're still part of the family. And you want to keep inviting them to special events. You want to keep them informed. You want them to feel special because of the contributions they have made in the past. You want to look for people in your community who can identify with your success and identify with your mission. And you want to bring them into the life of your organization too. You want to contact them, communicate with them, invite them, inform them, all of the things that you would do to make sure that they are beginning to understand that they are identified and valued, whether they're currently giving or whether they're currently leaders of your organization or not. Same thing goes for your corporations and foundations. We talked about the value of persistence. Keep these people informed. Don't be a stranger to them. You should not set up a dynamic so that when your first proposal is going out, they have never heard of you. You should be doing all of this work in preparation for that first proposal. You can take existing donors and upgrade them. If you see that somebody in your community is doing well and is giving at a very entry level, try to arrange a meeting. Invite them for coffee, have a board member invite them. Begin to talk up the organization. Send them information about which they otherwise wouldn't be aware, and let them know that there are great things happening with your organization. Okay, so we have leads and introductions that your board members make to you. Look at what your competition is doing. We talked about distinguishing yourself from other organizations. Well, look, who are those other organizations? Look at their donor lists if they're published. See who's on their boards. Just keep your eye out, because at some point, 1 or 2 of those people may rotate off the board, and they're there for you to pick up. So you've got to do a little bit of espionage in the process as well. Okay, so go back to your case statement. Let's talk about your key messages that you're going to pull out of it. We're going to talk about marketing now. Fundraising isn't only about taking. Fundraising is about an exchange of value. You may be receiving financial support, but let's open up the floor for a minute and talk about the things that you can be giving in return. What happens when an individual who decides to be a donor becomes a part of the life of your organization? What might he or she be receiving in return? Any thoughts?
Yeah.
It could be many things. One of them is prestige, social class, something to brag about with his friends in the club.
Okay.
So one of the things that a donor, a potential donor, can get in return is a social network of the direct network and the beneficiaries for my project. For example, there's a business school in Lagos, in Nigeria, that's called the Lagos Business School, and they donate about 200,000 naira every year to some of the students that we are working with in Lagos. And what that gives to the business school is a direct opportunity to connect with more than 10,000 students and tell them about the business school, so that by the time they graduate and they want to run their MBA program, the first school on their mind is Lagos Business School. So it's a direct exchange of value between our organization and theirs.
Nice. Okay, over here.
My name is Hashim from Sudan. First, the repetition, especially for the companies, that they need others to know that they have contribution to the communities, and also it's a win-win. Like for example, we have a project called Women Skills using football. So our partner is the Sudanese Football Association. Annually, they receive fund from the FIFA. I think it's $2,150 to support women's sport in Sudan, and they don't use that. But in our project, that we use we train the female to be community coaches. So for for us to work with them, that they show the FIFA that they're doing some they're using some of this grant with working with women. So they so by this they keeping the grant from the FIFA every year. So repetition and win-win situation.
Adriana from Panama. I think fulfillment, because in many cases, they're especially older people, seniors with a lot of experience. Maybe they retired from whatever they used to do, and they miss being a part of something. And sometimes they have a lot of knowledge or connections, and they could be really useful and helpful for other people. And this is also a great opportunity for many people that usually, like, for some reason, ended up in a career path that they didn't like, but their hobby or their passion is the topic that your organization addresses. This is a great opportunity to give them that chance.
Okay. Others could be to belong to a particular class. For example, like this, some countries donate to other countries, and why some of them have to do that is also to show that they are either world leaders or that they're in a particular class, the G7, the G12, and all that. Sometimes it's like to place the donors give or to donate to a particular project or country or all that to be in a particular class.
Well, I think one of the most important ones is mutual interest, like Hashim said. Like, for example, in Egypt, there's this NGO working on, for example, elections. A lot of the parliament members that are running for the parliament, they donate a lot of money to the organizations to observe the elections. So they are paying money to ensure that for their interests.
On this side of the room?
They also gain name, like they put their name, their brand, next to another brand that is doing good for the community. So they get this value, like they get the name of doing good in the community.
Good. We'll take two more.
She basically touched on it. It's in terms of brand alignment. So it's aligning your brand to a particular cause to show persons that you are doing some good in the community or in the country. So that you're hoping that it will trickle down into consumers supporting a particular brand or supporting your business and supporting you.
Good. Okay, we'll take one more if there is one more. Here. Yes.
I say tax reduction for big corporate.
Yes, so self-serving, but so true. Yes, so I think you folks have got it nailed. There are lots of motivations, and you know, in social work, one of the cardinal rules is you never question motivation in this environment. So, but you have to be sensitive to why people are giving, and you've got to address that need. I think that the answers were very comprehensive and very sophisticated, and I think you really have a sensitivity to what makes the donor tick. But the question is distinguishing and catering to those particular interests, okay? So, foundations and corporations. So, you know, more so than any other segment of the fundraising world, these are the folks who are going to need the written documentation and the proposals. So, if you've done all of this other homework from the beginning of this presentation, you're going to be well equipped to identify the key points, both through research about the prospect, as well as what you now know about your own organization, to put together a compelling proposal that's going to make the sale for you, okay? So, as I said earlier, before you write that first proposal, you want to do everything within your power to build the relationship. Find a key contact person who can help channel your proposal up the executive food chain so that you are getting the best possible reception for your proposal. And you want to be feeding information, you want to be inviting people, you want to do everything that you can to get closer to that prospect before you are in a position either to be invited to submit a proposal or to feel comfortable that you have the stars in place for you to submit that, that document, okay? What you have to project to your donors and your prospects, you'd like the unrestricted gift if you can get it. You know best how you want your money to be spent. And in many cases, your relationship will be such that the donor will trust you to make that decision well. Very few board members, for example, are going to say, I will meet your requirements for annual giving, but this is how I want the money to be spent. They're coming on as governors of your organization with the understanding that it takes unrestricted money to keep the trains running on time, okay? So that's not going to be much of an issue. But in many cases, you can count on those same people in addition to their annual giving, to fund a particular project, because it'll be close to their hearts or dear to them, and it's something that they want to see happen that otherwise would not. And there are others who will want to fund a particular project because it will give them the opportunity to be recognized by a large public. And so again, you've got to connect the dots and make sure that you have the right prospects matched up with the right kind of gift. Okay? Obviously, the unrestricted gift is the one that gives you the greatest freedom to make decisions with your organization to perpetuate the life of your organization. But if not, you're going to have to structure ideas and be creative about developing proposals that meet the donor's needs, but also meet yours. Sometimes you just have to package the existing work in such a way that the donor feels that it's special and is identified with his or her name. Why would you make a major gift? Your prospect may be a golf buddy of the president of your board, and there was a nice dialogue and relationship going on there where the ask is easy. We talked earlier about the personal satisfaction that comes from giving and in aligning your life's interests in a way that perhaps your career didn't allow. And that's a great reason for somebody to get involved in an organization. And so I was going to say, your cause resounds with their life's experiences. And so that combination of satisfaction, of intellectual curiosity, of feeling that this is where I want to leave my name, when I leave this world, this is what I want to be remembered for. All of those things are very, very compelling reasons to approach and cultivate a donor. Somebody may have been fortunate enough in life to, particularly these days, not just to become the millionaire, but the billionaire. And your organization is giving a donor the possibility for acknowledgement and legacy, that the name lives on. Personal validation, you may have a leadership opportunity. You can bring in that individual as the chairman of your board, and then really tap into his or her connections. Before you ask for $1 or £1 or whatever currency you're raising money in, make sure that you are cultivating a relationship. It's probably the single most important lesson you can take out of this meeting today. Relationships are what make fundraising tick. And whether it's on the personal level or whether it's on the corporate level or the foundation level, do whatever you can to make sure that you have an ongoing dialogue where you have a comfort in dealing with your point person on the other side of the table so that you don't have to be stiff and formal, but you can be comfortable and you can be frank and you can share important information in a way that makes that prospect or donor feel like an insider. You want a relationship similar to what you have with, they don't have to be your friends, but you want to treat them as if they are. Okay? So what goes into cultivation? You think you have to do all the talking, but the fact of the matter is you've got to do all the listening. And you may go into that meeting with an agenda about the importance of what you're doing and what the difference is, what difference you are going to make through your project. And you may have caught that prospect, even if he or she is a corporate rep or a foundation rep, on a day when all that individual wants to talk about is the crash in the stock market and what it's going to do to his pension. Or his kid just got thrown out of school, what's he going to do? Well, you know what? Your job just changed. Forget your case. You're there to listen because for whatever reason, that meeting is all about not you, it's about your prospect. And you want to be there to listen, you're going to do what you have to do so that you have a reason to pick up the phone the next day and say, how are you doing today? How's your kid? And when can we get together again? You have just created the agenda for the next meeting. You might not have had that opportunity if the kid hadn't got thrown out of school. So listening is probably the most important thing. And once you've listened, as soon as you get out of that room, go into a quiet corner, whip out your notebook, and write down everything that you just heard. That becomes part of your record. Because if you go on vacation to Tahiti and that donor wants to have a meeting with someone from your organization, you better have a record about the kid, about the giving history, about their corporate interests. Everything that you have learned should be in a database so that whoever has to pick up for you in your absence can go in and know as much as possible about that relationship. Very, very critical. And usually one of the first things that not-for-profits and NGOs forget to do. Okay? The day you leave an organization, that institutional memory needs to be on record so that your successor can pick up where you left off. Okay? So that's all about listening and sharing and knowing your prospect, keeping your prospect informed. You want to excite your prospect. You know, he's telling you about all his problems, but when the time comes, you want to give that person a reason to forget his problems and to be inspired by what you have to say. And then you want to be constantly acknowledging your prospect. He gives you an hour of his time, send an email, pick up the phone the next day and say, I just want to thank you for that hour. I know that you have a busy schedule. It was really important to us and I really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again. Okay? So don't forget the acknowledgement. And then don't forget, if you're running a special event, opening of an exhibition, new school is opening, graduation, even if you know he or she won't come, drop an invitation. Say, I'd love for you to see what we've done in a year. That they won't forget that. Okay? So, yes. Yes.
Or you can actually, hi. So how long would you suggest this entire process should take,
Well,
ideally?
I think that you have to trust your intuition. You know, if you know, it's like, how long do you have to cultivate your parent before you can ask for that new computer or car or, you know, you kind of get a sense when it's okay. It's not that much different. Okay? So there's no metric there. That's all internal, intuition. Yes?
So there's something I want to clarify. Wait. Some few years ago, I was leading a couple of young people in the community, and I was the youth president. And at some point, we were doing a fundraising, so we met a very successful lawyer in our community, and we were about to approach the lawyer to ask for funds But I stopped the executive team and I told them that let us cultivate relationship for a year. And we did cultivate a relationship. But after like 1 year, we went to him and we asked for funds and he said no. So until now, I've been trying to figure out what went wrong. And I came to understand that sometimes you meet a girl and you cultivate relationship and you ask the girl out and she says no. But what do you do, to avoid hearing no? Because the most important reason you're cultivating relationship is because you want money for the organization. And when you hear no, it's like a waste of time trying to cultivate relationship. So is it that you do a research in the first place to know that this person is going to say yes, and you now start cultivating relationship because it's an investment of time into cultivating the relationship?
We say in this country you can't win them all, and you can't. You are not in any business, in any sales business. You are never going to make every sale. Just not going to happen. You know that. You know about every salesman who's approached you. So this transactional relationship is not going to be any different. Just as you will never get every date that you want. So I mentioned earlier, you need to develop a callus. And you can't feel defeated, and you can't have hurt feelings. We move on. And there's always somebody else out there. It's a big world. So that's the name of the game. Okay?
I'm Marpine from Armenia. And my first question, 2 questions, if that's okay. And my first question is rather technical.
Yes.
When we were talking about keeping the organizational memory about cultivating the donors and would an Excel or Access database work, or is there a software that you have been using that has worked? One of the organizations I worked was really struggling with it because they had 10 different Excel spreadsheets created and they couldn't compile all of them together. It was a major issue for them. So I would really appreciate if there's a software that you have been using to share. And may I ask a second?
Yeah, sure.
My second question is about sharing consumer stories, beneficiary stories, or success stories as a method of cultivating donors or
Yes.
partners, and whether you find it ethically okay. Because if you work with a group, say currently I am serving in an organization that works with people with disabilities, and there's a fine line how you present stories of people and whether it's okay, like kind of selling your case, but also working on people's feelings in not a nice way. And I struggle with that fine line that you cross or not cross.
So in most cases, I always you have to get a release, either from the subject of the picture or that subject's guardian, to say it's okay to use this picture for public relations purposes on behalf of the organization. So you don't have a crisis of conscience then, because the parent or the guardian understands that this is something that will allow the work to improve and to be enhanced. Okay, so that's one way to approach that issue. Success stories. Look, when you use somebody's initials instead of a name, I think it compromises some of the credibility. But if it's such a great story and the individual will not consent, you do what you have to do. So you take it as far as you can within the parameters that you have. But success stories are tremendous. And again, make sure that you're just telling the facts. You don't have to enhance it with drippy adjectives. Make sure that it is credible and that it looks like news rather than.
Would you send them as newsletters, news blasts? Would you do it like quarterly, monthly to your donors or potential donors, or would you put it on your website?
Depends on your product. You can do all of those things. Often with mail, if you're sending an appeal letter, and I don't know how many of you are involved in direct mail, there's a device called the lift note, which is a small piece of paper that goes in with your ask. That is just a vignette about that individual, the child or the parent or whoever the beneficiary is, and it balances the letter. The letter is factual. You're talking about impacts. You're talking about need. You're talking about the macro picture, but you put in the lift note that talks about one little girl, you know, whom you rescued, well, then now you're providing the art and the science. Okay. Yes.
Oh, her second question about the
Second
software.
question.
How do you keep track of it?
So look, I'm old enough that I can remember doing this with shoeboxes and index cards. So, you know, yes, of course, software is better than doing it manually, and spreadsheets are better than using index cards and shoeboxes. So it's all, you know, a continuum. You can work successfully with all of it, but clearly software packages that are designed for fundraising are better. You know, I don't feel comfortable telling you in public, I really detest this one, but I'd rather use that one. I can tell you privately which one I'm going to be, you know, I'm steering toward, because I don't have one right now either. So, you know, I'm using spreadsheets and shoeboxes. So, and there are those that are, you know, there are big corporate entities that, you know, thousands of organizations in the United States use. I personally am not smart enough to know how to use that, so I don't want to go there.
It's called CRM system, so you can Google CRM and you'll see the whole. Those software are specifically to track relationships. So.
And I have used, and I'm trying to reinstall now, a very small system from a very small company. It's very user friendly, very efficient, and I'll share it with you privately. Yes.
Hi, thanks for, Alicia Marad from Jamaica. I just wanted to ask what innovative method in your personal experience that you've used to reach out to a donor to secure either a first meeting or to maintain a relationship. I know that, for example, one person, whenever it was someone over 60 years old, they do like a handwritten like thank you note just for the first meeting. What has worked in your experience? What's that one thing you've done that you think has been the most amazing?
Well, I think amazing is a strong term, but you can't go wrong with lunch. I'll tell you that. You know, if you call somebody and say, invite them to him or her to lunch, particularly if it's at a, you know, I used to work at the Kennedy Center here in Washington. When somebody got an invitation for a free lunch at the Kennedy Center, that was a pretty enticing invitation. So that worked pretty well. Look, it all depends on circumstance. Depends on what where you are, what you're working with. Sometimes maybe it's not you. Maybe it's your board member who initiates the call, and it's a two-on-one. Two-on-one conversations when you have an educated board member are often far superior than you trying to do all of the heavy lifting by yourself. So if there's a takeaway from your question, I think that is an important one to remember. I think that yeah, there's only so much that any of us can do. Sometimes people will simply say no because they know that ultimately you're going to be asking for money. You know, at the Kennedy Center, you could invite people to a performance. Well, not all of us can do that. So you don't always have that option. But perhaps your executive director can invite a prospect to come in and see a particular program in action with kids. Kids are a very compelling tool, as it were, to melt people's hearts. Okay, we'll take two over here, and then we'll go to the other side of the room.
My name is Polusha. I'm from Nigeria. My question is it ethical to compare your results with another organization, a donor you are interested in, has been funding, in trying to say, okay, we can do this better? Is it ethical?
I personally, I don't think it's ethical, and I don't think that it ultimately makes you look very good. So I think that you should be able to, your own results should be able to sustain your credibility.
Okay, even if you're diplomatic about it, I mean, not necessarily mentioning the organization, but in terms of like, okay, we do this, we can do that. As in, you don't have to bring up the name of the organization or anything when trying to get your message across as to like, okay, you know what the donor is interested in, and a particular organization they've been funding year after year. You use the results of that organization as a basis for presenting your own impacts?
I think that you're on very thin ice when you take that approach. I think that your own outcomes should make your case for giving, rather than to do so at the expense of another organization. I just don't think that it makes you look particularly good. And I think that if you're attracting a donor, particularly one who has been supporting another organization, you're more or less robbing somebody else's corral. Over here. You do that question? All right, we'll do this one then that one.
Just a question. I know there isn't a perfect question or easy answer for some of the questions, but when does no means no?
It's not a bad question. When does no mean no? I mean, you have to be pretty thick-headed. If somebody says, I really have no interest in what you're doing, I don't care about the welfare of children in this country, I'm making money for me, not for anybody else. In fact, I don't even plan to remain in this country, so why should I care? That's a no. If somebody says, no, I'm not interested, and you're able to come back and say, did you ever think what would happen to your children if, and sometimes you can guilt is a valuable tool there. So look, this all depends on how daring you're willing to be. If you think that you have nothing to lose whatsoever because the guy's just not interested, then say something outrageous, because you're not going to lose, okay? But there is no absolute answer that, no means no when A, B, and C are in place. You've got to judge it. And sometimes, when you think you have nothing to lose and you throw out that wild card, it gets you in the door. You never know. Over here.
I'm Alana from Brazil, and actually I would like to comment on that, on the no thing, and talk to my colleague Tayo, because he was about like, okay, how do I do all the no's? And what I do have a short experience with fundraising, but what I've learned so far is that you don't ask someone for money on a first opportunity. So it's like going out for a date and you don't propose to the person like for the rest of the life. And this is a relationship that has to be built, a long-term relationship that has to be. So sometimes a no can mean no, like in this situation, but what it seems that how can you turn this no into a yes? And this is the question that you can ask to the person at the end of a meeting. So, okay, thank you, but how can we turn this to a yes and a different opportunity? Because sometimes it's not the organization's not interested in what you're offering, it's just that they can't afford helping you in the specific way you're asking at that point. So you can also ask, how else would you be able to offer your services or your help, or borrow us your name or the name of an organization to enrich the reliability of our own organization. And with that, you can continue growing a relationship until you reach a point of a marriage, and everything you have to do is like, continue to grow whatever it is that you're aiming for. But just be careful on asking for money on a first date, because you will certainly get a no, and a frustrated one.
That's a fantastic statement, and I only regret that I didn't say it first.
Yeah, just 2 quick questions. First, on members of the board of directors of organizations, are they entitled to salaries or other benefits, or is just a voluntary commitment?
In this country, at least, when you are the member of a not-for-profit, or a board member of a not-for-profit, it is a voluntary. It actually costs the board member rather than the other way around.
So no benefits.
No benefits. Gratification.
What's the difference between like foundation and the non-governmental organizations? Are they the same or those are two different?
So a non-governmental organization is providing a service to improve society, as opposed to a foundation, which is usually in a position to grant money to others to do the work that will grant money to NGOs and not-for-profits to do work that will benefit society. So foundations are significantly funding agents because of industrial fortunes or personal fortunes or inheritances. So that's the most significant difference. Periodically, foundations such as Gates will fund, but also do the work themselves, fund the work themselves.
All right. Hi, I'm
Hi.
Sylvie from Nepal, and in a room full of like future social entrepreneurs, like most likely, if not, would be interested to start something completely new, like something that doesn't have credibility or like a proven outcome yet. So if you want to start off like an organization or something that you have in mind, like what would be your suggestion to start out with for fundraising?
Well, I think that before you raise the first dollar, you have a couple of things you have to do. You may possess the vision, but you need some allies in the process. So you need to shop this idea around with some people who can help you make it into a reality. So again, you're not going to ask for money on the first date, but you can find people of significance in your country and say, would you give me an hour of your time? I'd like to get some advice about my vision for the future, and I'd only like to hear your opinion about it. And if that conversation results in a second meeting, because you're building an ally and an alliance, that individual might be able to bring a third and fourth person to the table as well. At which point, you're beginning to build a little bit of an engine and some momentum that allows you to go through all of these other steps, beginning with your mission and your vision and everything else that follows, so that you are positioned to become a new you're birthing a new organization.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So there is a process in fundraising management called move management, and we have touched upon it earlier in this discussion when we approached the idea of database and information management. So you cannot have an infinite number of donor prospects. Usually we all have small staffs. You have to do some triage here and pick the ones that where you stand the chance of greatest success, okay? So let's say that you, in your first year in this work, are going to identify your 20 top prospects. You need to have a profile and a plan for each one. And you're going to start with identifying the prospect. You're going to think through your plan for cultivation, depending on whether it is an individual, whether it is an old person, a young person, what you determine the point of interest to be with your organization. You're going to figure out ultimately what the best way is to make the ask, whether it's you yourself or whether it's a proposal or whether it's your board president. You're going to figure out the stewardship. After you make the ask, the relationship moves to a different level. And you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to sustain the relationship so that your future makes the second ask easier. And you want to document each step. And once you've documented the step, you want to think ahead, what comes next? What are your next 2 steps that are going to keep the ball rolling on this? Whether it's leading up to the ask or whether it's after you've gotten the gift. So here's a little bit of a sample cultivation plan. We've laid out the calendar for the year. And we're going to, we're going to go through these various things. You're going to add the individual to your email list. You're going to ask for your one of your board members to work with you, to invite the individual for coffee. You're going to do all of these different things. And then at a certain point, you're going to feel that the individual knows enough about you and that you have made a credible enough case to say, we'd like you to consider a gift of $10,000 for the coming year. That won't come as any great surprise to the prospect. And you will have done what you're supposed to do, and hopefully with some success. Okay, so we don't have to dwell on this because you will be able to download this. And that's just a thought. So we have about 25 minutes for more questions and discussion. That's okay.
Hello, great presentation. Thank you so much. I'm Janina from Venezuela, and I want to ask you if you have any advice to do fundraising in hostile environments, especially in countries where helping non-profit is helping terrorism, in the case of Venezuela. So donors can be a little bit scared to give you money. So if you have any advice, how can we approach donors to give money to us and don't have problems with the government and stuff?
So tell me a little bit more about the organization.
Yes, well, my organization works against socialism in Venezuela. We sell ideas of freedom, so the government don't like it. So when we approach you to donors, they say, "Oh, I don't want troubles with the government." So it's really hard to, make fundraising there. But we want to continue doing our work for freedom of the speech, human rights, economic freedom there.
Without being glib, I think that you should be doing your fundraising in Panama City and Miami, because that's where your expat community is. And I don't think it's any secret that the ones who leave first are the ones who have most. And I think that you're putting donors, given the current environment in Venezuela, you're putting your donors at significant risk. But you have a very significant diaspora, at least in those two cities, if not more. And I think that's where your chances for success are, without getting anybody into significant physical trouble.
More comments or questions? All right, I will head over to this side of the room, and we also have coffee that's just arrived. So if we need a biological break at some point, that's acceptable as well. Who had their hand up over here? Okay, so you're first, and we'll pass it along that way.
I need to add an experience that I had with my director. We went to an executive in a telecoms company. The meeting talked about to fund the educational project. So when we get to the executive officer, at that time on the TV he watched the summary of the Premier League, the week summary about the result and scores. So and then he started talking to the executive about discussion about the football, and he's like Arsenal and this stuff. My director is British, so like 15 minutes the topic about the football and the Premier League, and suddenly he just looked at me and said, "By the way, Hashim is leading a project involving the football," and the dialogue again about the football, about the projects, and we end up that he interested to know more about this project, and we forget about the main purpose that we came to the office. And when I asked my director why didn't mention the educational project, he said forget about that. He have a passion about the football, so we have to encourage him, and we find another donor for the education.
I agree. I would do the. I think the conversation went the right way. Yes.
Mine is with the board. When you have a static board, let's say your board is not cooperating with the fundraising strategies, or they are just engrossed with what they're doing with their different firms or organizations. And then you really want them to be involved with what you're doing and be part of the process. How do you get them to speak, to be part of the fundraising, or to commit some resources to the organizations and all?
You will never make that case all by yourself. You need to have your executive director and you need your board president on your side. Without those two endorsements and without their active participation, it simply won't happen. There's a limit to what any staff person can achieve. And I will say one thing that I think applies in almost any country that's represented here today. You know, if you are being held accountable for the fundraising in your organization and the critical elements for success are not in place and show no signs of ever being in place, then it's time to look for a new job. I mean, you have to recognize that particularly in the not-for-profit and NGO world, there does not always exist an appropriate level of objectivity that will allow you to put those critical success factors out there. And if that is the case, and you feel that you are so frustrated in your inability to be successful, then you've got to consider whether that is the right place for you. Not because you are not capable, not because you are not a good professional, but because the organization is not backing you up so that you can do what you have to do.
When the situation is that you're the founder of the organization or you're even the executive director, how do you really get the board to speak? Like convincing them to really stick to the fundraising strategies of the organization and be involved with fundraising for the organization and all that.
Well, you can bring
elements.
Since you know, there is often a dynamic in organizational life when you are in it, or if you are working for an organization, well, then clearly you can't know too much. So you bring in an outside expert, a consultant, who addresses the board and says, I'm aware that you know, this is where you are, and I read your strategic plan, and that's where you want to be, and I'm here to work with you because your executive and your board president invited me to make a presentation. These are the things that you have to do if you're really determined to take your organization from point A to point B. So you need an outside expert to say to this group, this is what has to happen. And then